and very senior leaders and other leaders that we commenced that journey. Landed incredibly well, evaluated incredibly positively, to the point that we were able to secure further funding to develop more facilitators to take the work to more leaders and to actually start delivering our own locally led masterclasses. And then the big difference from my organization was that my organization made the decision to really up the game as United Lincolnshire Hospitals, because our leadership saw this absolutely fits into our vision of cultural change and transformation of our leadership, that I was set aside and asked to lead a program to bring this work to the 325 members of our Leading Together Forum.
Mm.
And
Tim, you've described very much logistically, some really useful things about how the power of it has really, seen a change. But what was the actual change that people were feeling and seeing? What was the thing that happened? What changed?
I think the thing that happened that changed for them, and one of the other key things around the above difference is with leading inclusively with cultural intelligence, the alignment of the inclusion agenda to leadership in a structured and a meaningful way, that they were able to take their learning and actually start working differently as leaders with their teams. And then coming back a little bit more strategically thinking, at around this time, the Messenger Review came out. A key document, I think it was summer last year, summer 2022, I'm thinking it was June. And in that review, one of the recommendations in the Messenger Review is actually that we equip our leaders to be able to lead inclusively. So what it done is it made the inclusion agenda come alive in a different way, because they'd heard people talking about the Equality Act and we need to do this and we need to do that. But the heavy reliance on the ED&I, which is a small team, the small ED&I team, to deliver that, this took it to a whole new level, because it made it meaningful. It brought it alive for people in their contexts. Just jumping forward to even to last week, I was able to deliver a program to a group of matrons. And we're going to be working with those matrons as to actually, what does this mean for you in practice? What are your, and Jennifer has a lovely phrase, what are your pinch points? What are the challenges that you as matrons have in leading the nursing workforce at your level? And let's work together to how this can help. This can be and that's been one of the key and exciting things, that this is really, if we take this seriously, if we get this right, this is one of the solutions to help you. And it's not an added burden, but actually by leading inclusively with our cultural intelligence, this actually helps you. If we think back to some of the, one of the things that when we think of our cultural intelligence capabilities, we think about what is our intrinsic drive and what is our extrinsic drive. So important. Yes, because for the majority of times, our leaders want to lead inclusively. They want to lead effectively. But actually, not only harnessing what they want to do and really supporting them to develop that, but actually to align it to actually, in the midst of your hugely busy day jobs, there's benefits in this, that extrinsic interest. So this will really help you. And the penny drops and those light bulb moments are just amazing to watch when you're in these sessions.
And sorry, just to bring in Judith, if I may, that you yourself have been on this journey with Above Difference. Those light bulb moments have happened for you. Do you mind sharing some of those?
Yeah, sure. I think maybe just to back up a little bit, to give you a bit of my personal position and why that was important to me. When I started my new job in May 22 as a director of psychological professions at NELFT, there hadn't been any director There'd been nobody in post for about 10 years. There'd been no role for about 10 years. And so what had occurred was a kind of a lack of leadership within psychological professions, and what that looked like and how that had evolved. I was presenting, of course, as a white woman, but I actually come from an ethnic minority myself. And over a period of time, although having been quite, I guess, inquisitive and interested in diversity, had found it more challenging and difficult to ask questions and to acknowledge and describe difference in what felt safe. And I think what Jennifer offered me was safety, to have those very difficult discussions about what it might feel like to look one way, feel a different way, to try to understand what other people might be going through, to include everybody within that discussion. And within that safety, we were able to develop and evolve and work together to bring on my team and for my leadership team to try and find our place. When we think about inclusive leadership, it's not just about it's not just about me as, a white person or me from a particular community, but it's also me as a psychologist and what's that like within a multidisciplinary team, and the history of psychology in my trust, and perhaps having been a bit othered with having lack of leadership. And how do we include everyone in that discussion and make them feel that they have their part? So I'd come up against some really difficult conversations when I came to the trust, which were probably based on A, my seniority, and B, the perception of my background and my privilege. And I'm not saying I don't have privilege. Of course I have privilege, but the perception of others of that and how that sat with me as a person. And Jennifer offered me the opportunity to talk about that and to explore that. And then later for my team to explore that. What does that mean for our values and our vision, what we were trying to drive within psychological professions? What did that mean for patient care? How were we able to engage with people who are using our services on the basis of our difference, and how we shared that across our cohorts? So I think my journey, I think there's lots of light bulb moments. Every session with Jennifer is an utter privilege. It's incredible. We have great in-depth discussions. She brings theory and evidence, but she has a personal quality and a personal touch, which makes me feel safe. And I cannot underestimate that. Oh, sorry, that is the most important piece, absolutely, for me. That I can ask any question and share any thoughts around what it's like to be me in my position, and she will always be able to contain that, hold that, and work with me on that in terms of development of my leadership. So it's light bulb moments are multiple, but it's an onward journey about how we establish this team and the safety within the team to be able to ultimately to benefit the people who we're serving, the patients using our services.
And that's hugely important, that piece about safety. And I think as you're trying to not manipulate, but change a culture, massage it into a different way of being, and that being led by people who understand the behaviors that they need to then developed and implement for the rest of the organization. It's hugely important, Tim, isn't it? That culture change piece that Jennifer comes in, she helps shape these ideas and gives people the tools that they need to then cascade that throughout the organization. That's what you've seen?
Yes, it is. And I think I need to apologise that I haven't got the lovely background. But when we came on the call, so you've got my study here. But when we came on the call, I had the background and then I just kind of disappeared into a haze of purple, and it wasn't a very good look. So apologies for that. Yes, it has made a difference. Some of the important things to know about the United Lincolnshire Hospitals when I speak about our trust is that we were known as a challenged organization, incredibly. And some of the things that have been important to us as we've worked across the board around improving and transforming culture is we were year on year bottom of the pack in the NHS staff survey for comparable acute trusts. And it was almost like a negative self-fulfilling prophecy. That when the staff survey went out, we would expect that when it came back that there we go, bottom of the pack again. And our chief executive, Andrew, was really keen when he joined the organisation a few years ago that we're not happy with that. Our culture cannot stay the same negative. We need to somehow work out how we break out of that. And as we know, cultural change doesn't happen overnight. It takes a lot of commitment and it takes time. The good news for us this year is that for the first time, we are not bottom of the pack. So we're really concerned that we don't get complacent, but actually, for the first time, we've seen those green shoots of change making a difference to how people in our workforce are reporting in the NHS staff survey of their experience at working at United Lincolnshire Hospitals NHS Trust. And I firmly believe that, that cultural intelligence and leading inclusively with cultural intelligence is playing, as is our people director, Claire Lowe. I've just come off a meeting with Claire, who sends her best wishes, Jennifer, to and congratulations on the 5-year anniversary. That we are convinced that actually this is central to that journey that we're taking. And we're now talked about at national and regional level. Andrew, our chief executive, is asked to share us what is going on, what is making a difference at United Lincolnshire Hospitals. And we're now talked about as not being a challenged organisation, but an organisation that's making improvement, yes, with some challenges still. We know we're a very large, one of the largest acute hospital, non-teaching hospital, acute hospital trusts in the country. Still got lots of work to do. It is a journey, and that journey continues. So we're seeing that through, and I've just started some work to look at how this is coming through to the experience of our patients, looking at those patient surveys as well.
And Jennifer, this is it, isn't it? This is the impact of the above difference model. It's not just about that cultural intelligence piece. What are the other elements that you're bringing in that's literally transforming these trusts from challenged ones to visibly making that progress in those staff surveys?
I have to say, I think the most important element probably wouldn't be us. The thing these two organizations have in common is the commitment from the leadership at the very top. Andrew Morgan, as chief executive of Tim's organization, came on the program himself, completely immersed himself in it, and led by example when it came to sort of saying to other leaders, we've got to do this right, we've got to get this right. And the same thing with NELFT, although Judith heads a particular department in unit in NELFT, and I've worked with her and her team quite separately, but that's part of a much broader piece of work that I've been doing with NELFT over the last probably 2.5 years. And I think that's where it starts. It starts with that leadership commitment. It starts with people right at the top of the organization who are saying, yes, we're going to start this journey, and it is going to be a journey, and we're going to stay the distance, and we're going to keep consistent, and we're going to be open to doing things differently. So again, both NELFT and ULHT both have their own facilitator teams who we're working with, and we work with facilitators over a 6-month period to really embed their practice into the organization. And Tim's now supporting other facilitators himself. So that's that. So, and that I think is where it starts. But then in terms of the model we're bringing in, it is that challenge to leadership. It is saying, how do we do this? But doing it in a way that's safe. And I think one of the things I wanted to do differently with Above Difference was move away from some of those sort of EDI spaces that can be quite difficult for everyone. The kind of spaces where people don't feel safe, don't feel heard, whoever's on what side of the scale. There are all sorts of reasons, because I think from and I'm no psychologist, but what I do know is that people don't learn where they don't feel safe. And actually what we need, and if people are sitting in places where they're so busy kind of protecting themselves from what they perceive as some sort of attack or something, then actually learning and change isn't taking place. And for us, this is a journey of change. And it's a journey of transformation. And so what we're trying really hard to do is get people feeling they can come with us on that journey and that we can walk that journey together. And so the focus on leadership and saying, actually, this is about good leadership. And when leadership is good, then actually we should be leading everybody well. But actually, in order to lead everybody well, you do need a core set of skills and tools. We do need cultural intelligence because, as our wonderful friend Dave says, cultural intelligence helps leaders adapt their leadership style when working across diverse cultural contexts or working with diverse individuals. You do need to have a vision, and that's where the value-based leadership comes in. And, I know myself and Judith have had lots of interesting discussions about vision, and me pushing back at her and say, yeah, I know that your whole EDI stuff, but tell me, what's your vision for inclusion? And that's a question I often ask leaders, what would it look like if it was good? Because we kind of get into what I call inclusion speak, where we kind of reel off the statistics, but statistics do not inclusion make. It's about how people feel. It's about, and it's not just about saying we want people to belong, but it's about creating these new spaces that everybody can belong to. And then, of course, it's about intentional inclusive leadership. So people then applying those skills intentionally and they're using it and in their leadership. And again, one of the things I say is, it's not a buy one, get one free. You don't become a leader and become an inclusive leader. And again, just because you're an ally, love the whole ally thing, but that again doesn't make you an inclusive leader. Yeah, it's really a fundamental transformational change to how you lead. And being aware of your own cultural values, your preferences, your biases, which is the tool that CQ gives you. And then, of course, finally, there's that thing of, okay, how do we manage the change? And when I was a chief executive, someone told me something I've never forgotten. And he said, getting an organization to move is like getting a tanker to shift. Mm-hmm. We're not yachts, it's literally you're getting a tanker to shift. And I'm a great fan of John Cotter. And he says over 80% of organizational change is doomed to fail unless we do it right. So I think we've often left out the change management bit of it, actually how do we take those key steps that help us now say, we want to move from this organization that was this monolith that was set up 150, 75 years ago to deliver care to the community and to be fairly solid. We now want to shift this to work in a different way. But how do we do that without the whole thing capsizing? And I think that's why our model is beginning to make a difference, because that's where the real challenge comes in. So people are learning the tools, learning the skills, but the rest of the journey is, okay, so let's think about how you actually use them now.
And that is so core and so crucial to why it's so important to use cultural intelligence in this transformation piece, specifically in the NHS, because one of the key things I tend to say is that, the language of cultural intelligence is not confrontational, but the level of introspection can be uncomfortable. And when you get that discomfort and the defensiveness and the fear, how do you navigate that? Well, the cultural intelligence piece really helps with that. But like you say, it's not enough. You could bring in the change model. The transformational piece then comes by bringing in those other elements as well. And Tim and Judith, we have talked a bit about the impact on you as leaders, and this idea of challenge and that discomfort, that confrontation that can come when we talk about inclusion. A lot of leaders immediately get, well, I'm not racist, that kind of feeling, but that and that feeling that they're going to be attacked in some way when being asked to become inclusive leaders. I'm sure many people in the NHS feel, well, things aren't changing fast enough. It's not that tide isn't turning. There are too many disparities in our system, too much inequality. How can the approach, if I can ask you, Judith, that Jennifer has prescribed and has delivered for you, how can that work in other environments?
I think it's something about respect, really, respect of everybody's difference and being very kind of aware of that, but also being brutally honest with ourselves. For me, it's about, and within the NHS, it's about the delivery services. Are our services equitable? Are we actually accessing everybody who needs to access our services? Do they have the opportunity to? Are we as inclusive as we need to be? So for me, and the work that we're doing in psychological professions, which is relevant to lots of other places, of course, is around the health inequalities piece, is around what the model, the historic traditional model of patients come into a clinic or a hospital and that's where they're seen, and if you don't turn up you get a DNA letter and you're discharged. That is of the past. That is far from inclusive. How are we getting our professionals, our leaders, our clinicians to think differently about how they deliver their offer? How are they getting out into the communities? How are we setting up partnerships with local authorities, with voluntary charity, social enterprise sector? What are we doing to really offer that care? And I think that with Jennifer's support, I've been really able to look very closely at our delivery model and question it with my team and think, we can do this a whole lot better. And it ties in really well with the PCREF agenda, the Patient Care Race Equality Framework from NHSE, and how we are hearing the voices of people who use our services, of the people who support them, their carers, their families, and working with them to co-produce a much better offer. Now, that cannot happen without a culturally intelligent, inclusive leadership scaffolding around it or support around it. I think the two need to work and do work hand in hand to do that effectively. And I'm not saying we're there yet. We are far from there yet. And when we think we're there, we're in trouble because we'll never be there. We've got to keep striving for it, but we cannot do it without an inclusive, culturally intelligent perspective to be able to try and address health inequalities.
And Tim, I'm aware that the government has recently launched the NHS long-term workforce plan with that focus on 3 areas: train, retain and reform. How can cultural, intelligent, inclusive leadership, where is that in those train, retain, reform pillars going forward?
One of the things that in the role that I've just stepped into, which really has been the logical progression from where we were starting to take the organisation with leading inclusively with cultural intelligence, is that I've been asked to lead the NHS Culture and Leadership Programme in the Trust, which is a national programme which many of the people on the call today might have heard about. We signed up to that programme a few years ago, and we didn't really do it properly. And what I've been able to do is to get some structure around that, and leading inclusively with cultural intelligence underpins all of that. And we're in now what they call the discovery phase, and we're actually looking, and in the discovery phase, it's what it says on the can, really. You discover, but from a different angle, what your own data is telling you about where you are at and what you need to design and to then deliver moving forward to achieve the desired results. And one of the elements is around the culture around our workforce. And so we've actually, at the moment, I've got one of our people in workforce intelligence working exactly on that, and it links to that plan that you're telling us absolutely directly. Where are we at with our workforce? What are our needs moving forward, and how are we going to actually develop that workforce to be able to deliver the services that we need to deliver to our patients? And the other element that I've been asked to lead on is around implementing a just culture within the organisation. So when we know that in a complex organization, sometimes things go wrong. But actually a blame culture, research shows us, is not the best way to deal with that. And so we're using the NHS Just Culture Guide as the driving framework, and I've been asked to lead that piece of work. So thinking about how we develop that workforce to be able to, and I think when we get this right, not only does it improve the reputation of the organization, but actually when we get these things right, that actually people will want to stay because they know that they can thrive and they can grow and they can develop in our organization. Because one of the challenges we have, in rural Lincolnshire, it's, if you look at our demographic, I'd have to have a quick look at the latest census data, but over 90% white British. And yet look at our workforce, very diverse workforce. So actually, how do we want to let people know that this is a really good place to come and work and live and to develop as professionals, but also to provide those services to our population in Lincolnshire. And of course, when people come and join us and stay, then actually that that increases the diversity in our population, because the vast majority of people will then will choose to live in the county.
And I think this is a really crucial point about how work within an organization just filters out into society in a very meaningful and transformative way. Judith, when you listen to these things and you listen to Jennifer talking about making sure that leadership are very much on board, I think we can't ignore the fact that actually you can get a lot of pushback from leaders in organizations, especially in NHS scenarios and trusts. So how would you say Above Difference has been able to make a difference when there is a lot of this pushback to say, well, it's not just for leaders to do, I'm feeling very uncomfortable, what about the rest of staff here? They have got a part to play as well.
I think it's giving us those tools to have those difficult conversations, really, isn't it? And I think it's being able to not shy away from having those conversations, but go to them and feel equipped to have the skill sets to have some challenging conversations. I think there is an acknowledgement, certainly in my trust in NELFT, that, as we've all been saying, it does need to come from the top down. In order to embed, like, you really have to have that buy-in around inclusive leadership and cultural intelligence for that to be recognised. And I think that there is, having moved to NELFT about just less than a year and a half ago, I am really very impressed with them and their ability to look at their diversity and celebrate diversity. But I think that also comes from some very skilled leaders who are able to talk openly about their difference and bring that to the fore. And then have those more challenging conversations on the ground as well when you do get that pushback.
And Jennifer, sorry, do continue, Judith.
I was just going to say, probably Jennifer's got an even more competent answer to that. But I think that's where you were going, Marsha. So
it was. Yeah, exactly. Everyone's on board with the whole radio segue thing. Jennifer, tell me, you get this pushback. You say, who do you think you are coming in here wanting to talk to our leaders? Yeah. How do you deal with that? Because there is a sense that maybe it isn't either or, there is a this and piece, but it does have to be, led from the top.
Absolutely. I was looking at the new sort of workforce, the long-term workforce plan, and it says, one of the things it says in this is that the future of NHS human resources and organizational development, it is really dependent on that consistently compassionate, inclusive and value-driven culture. And we know, all the authorities in the world tell us that leaders define the culture of any organization, or indeed any space, and one of our, most commonly used phrases, which I know is one that you quite love as well, Marsha, is the one from Brunett and Walker that says that actually the culture of any organization is defined by the worst behavior that the leader will tolerate. And I think one of the things which comes back to Judith's answer is that often a lot of the bad behavior that shapes culture, and I define it like having a bowl of water and a drop of blue ink. And every time something's not dealt with properly, it's like that drop of blue ink goes in, So every time an issue of racism or sexism or homophobia or any of those things isn't dealt with. And often the challenge is leaders want to deal with those things. I have to say, I've been hard pressed to find a leader who doesn't want to get this right. Leaders want to, but what they often didn't have were the tools to deal with those things, to have those conversations, to deal with I didn't want to say something because I didn't want that person thinking, I'm accusing them of being a racist. Now, I often say to people, it's never going to be as tough for you to do that as it is for the person who was the victim of it and they didn't wasn't dealt with properly. But I think where cultural intelligence and I think value-driven leadership plays such a key role is actually giving people the tools. Is actually giving them the tools to have those difficult discussions. It's the tools to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. with being aware of your own difference and how that comes into play, and how your own sort of values comes into play all the time. And what we find, and I'm sure Tim would back me up on this with the training he does, is that suddenly people are saying, okay, I feel like I can have that conversation now. I feel like I understand why this may have happened and how I can deal with it. And I think when you're offering leaders that, as opposed to an approach that's just a kind of, well, you know what, you're a leader, you should be getting this right. And so let me come and hit you with a stick and show you how to get it right. I think when you're saying, listen, I can offer you something that can help, and then people start the journey and find out that they are actually learning new skills, they are actually getting tools. And as Tim said earlier, they're able to take those into their day-to-day life and begin to make a difference. Then in many ways, yeah, that really does get people coming to the table. But it's still a challenge, because I think, we ask people to work very differently. We ask for time commitment. People often say to me, if I want to work with a board, can you just do it in half a day? And my response to them is something like, you haven't got a half a day problem, so I haven't got a half a day solution. But, you're going to have to invest. And, I love what Nancy Klein says, the quality of our solutions, I think, I may be paraphrasing, is equal to the quality of our thinking. So actually, if you're an organization and you want to get this right, you're going to have to spend time talking about it, thinking about it, trying something new in order for us to get a different solution.
And really, what you've described there is how then do you demonstrate those best behaviours? You use Greenfield and Whitaker there, the culture of any organisation can be shaped by the worst behaviours leaders are willing to tolerate. And I absolutely have picked that up off you. I'm going to out myself right here. I tend to flip that and say, and therefore maybe the culture of any organisation can be shaped by the best behaviours leaders are willing to demonstrate. What are those behaviours? How do you demonstrate them? What does that look like? That's the cultural, intelligent and inclusive leadership piece Above Difference brings. And Tim, can you share some of the stories maybe that people have come to you with saying, you know what, the leadership team have gone through this and now I'm feeling it, and this is a thing that changed for us, this is a thing that changed for me?
Just thinking about behaviours, I'd like to just come in slightly differently. We've mentioned Andrew Morgan, our chief executive. He's recently announced that he's retiring at the end of March next year. And I said to him, Andrew, we really want to celebrate your leadership, and we really want to maximise and all that has been achieved under your leadership. Can you think about what you would like? What would you like to be your legacy? And he came straight back to me. I wasn't expecting him to come straight back to me quite as quickly as he did, but in his immediate, he said, "Behaviour."
Yeah.
Behaviour. If my legacy can be that we've changed the behaviour of our leaders and our people, then I feel that I can leave knowing that whatever retirement means for me, I can leave knowing that I have made a difference. And I think coming back to examples of how this is making a difference, that our leaders saying that they are leading their team meetings differently, that they using their cultural intelligence, their understanding of cultural value preferences, that they're flexing their leadership style to make sure that those people who normally would be incredibly quiet for whatever reason, but they're actually taking this and applying it in practice. One of the key things that's coming out with the work I'm doing with our matrons, like a lot of organizations, we've got a lot of nurses who have been trained, internationally trained, and are joining us from overseas. And to really see how they are rising to the challenge and not assuming we've got to push these people into our mold of this is how we do things here. But actually, as I say to them, we've got as much work to do to support the wards receiving people from different cultures and different backgrounds, as we've got to support the people that are joining us. If we're really serious about intentionally inclusive leadership. And one of the other things that's really important for us, and it's one of the key things around the culture and leadership program, is that our leadership is collective, compassionate, and inclusive. And it's about how we maximize that synergy. That the problem with synergy is if it only ever remains as potential synergy, then we haven't really leveraged everything, and actually working really hard at that leadership level to make sure that we're delivering this. So I'm seeing those teams functioning differently, having a different approach, and it will dovetail into the work we're doing around just culture, that when things do go wrong, that we deal with it, yes, effectively. Of course, we know we have to deal with things robustly. And when you're talking about just culture things, you're talking about situations where a person's potentially been harmed. Of course, you have to deal with it robustly and fairly, but actually dealing with it differently than we might have dealt with it before. So we're seeing people practically on a day-to-day basis telling us they're leading differently. And then their colleagues are saying it's the feel within our in our team, within our department, is beginning to feel different. Does that make sense there, Marsha?
Yes, absolutely. And I think when I'm listening to you and that sense of intentionality around it, and Judith, I think that's a really key point, because with a lot of this work, when you're talking about inclusive leadership, inclusive cultures, a lot of us know why we want things to be. I mean, we've had all these frameworks, we've had a lot of strategies come out of the NHS. We need to do this, we need to do this. So you know why. We even know what we want some of those outcomes to look like, but that how to move from one to the other, and that intentionality around being able to enforce it and implement it and take it forward as leaders has been a really key part of that difference. But then how do you measure that kind of intentionality? And of course, when it comes to spending money, everyone wants to know, well, show me how it's been done. Have you been able to measure that in any way?
We're still early days, and we're kind of planning our KPIs, how we're going to be measuring the difference that we're adding from having a key vision and having our values. But it is very much around the subject I was mentioning before, which is health inequalities, and how are we accessing people who might not naturally come forward through usual NHS routes to access mental health support, and how well are we engaging with our community partners and seeing some change on the ground, even if that's indirect psychological consultation rather than that direct face-to-face patient work. That's all about understanding, that we are intentionally going out there to seek people who might not be able to access psychological support or mental health support, and ensuring that we are adjusting the way that we practice being culturally intelligent in order to do that, to reach them through as many means as that we can do. So, I mean, ultimately it's, less presentations to our urgent care services, less inpatient presentations, less bed days in our mental health inpatient wards, for example. Ultimately, is what we're looking at, about that preventative element of psychological intervention in the community, which is part of mental health transformation generally. So work in progress, but you're right in what you say about intentionality. I guess what I would add about intentionality is it's not just being intentional, it's about being emotionally connected with that intentionality. It's that you really feel the need to be intentional. You feel what it might mean to people who are using our services, or what it might be like for them not to have our services. That you feel emotionally connected to that. And I think that is very much a key part of the journey at all levels, and also all kind of parts of our mental health system, really, that people feel connected to the people who are using our services. But to do that, you have to have some cultural intelligence and some inclusive leadership to get them to that point.
Yeah, and that's the key part, isn't it, about that solutions piece that Above Difference brings, is that connection. It's clear, the vast majority of people who work in the NHS do so vocationally. They do so because they're driven by this need to do better for society, for the public, for the patients that we're here to serve. And so being able to have someone like Above Difference come in with a solution to be able to fulfill that in the widest and biggest and the best possible way has really been a way of equipping those leaders to be able to do those things. I see you nodding your head there, Tim. Do come in and on that point.
It's almost going full circle, because it's starting at the top.
Mm.
And I think for me, as I said, when people ask me about what is the above difference, it is that, as Jennifer, as you said, when you go to organizations, if they're not prepared to allow you to come in and at the top, but also that other unique selling point of the alignment of leadership and the inclusion agendas. I mean, I've got people who are now, because we've been on this journey for a while, and Jennifer, who I'm thinking about, who've left this organization and moved elsewhere, that are actually wanting those conversations about how can we bring this to where we're going, because they've experienced firsthand the difference this can make. And it is that, that journey continues.
And Judith, what would you say to your colleagues that are on this call? They might be listening, that they're looking to take this journey themselves. What would you say to them?
I'd say go for it. I think it's essential. I think it's essential. If we want to be really great leaders in the NHS, we have to be culturally intelligent. We have to be inclusive. And Jennifer's offering a very important user-friendly framework that makes it safe, like we were saying before, psychologically safe to take that journey. So influence your leaders, influence the trust boards that you're working in, and ask them to kind of have a think about bringing Jennifer in, because I think it's a really great solution. Why not, Jennifer? Huh?
Thank you, Judith.
Well, stay right there, Judith and Tim, because I want to introduce Naima Ali. She's been sifting through your comments and questions for us. Naima, is there any questions that have come through for our esteemed guests? We can't hear Naima for some reason.
Oh, Naima, are you on mute?
There you
Sorry.
go. No, there we go.
Not at the moment. No questions have come in. I have encouraged people in the chat to please send in your questions. The last 30 minutes will be used to answer them.
Well, trust me, I have plenty more. If our audience don't yet. Here we've just had one.
Here we have one. Yes.
Yeah, what are the tools? So yeah, I mean, this probably, Jennifer, if you can outline a bit about how does the model work in practice? What are the tools? What are we equipping our leaders with? And then maybe I can get Jennifer and Judith and Tim to explain how they've actually implemented them.
Oh, hi, Marinella. Great question. So, yeah, I mean, the main thing, I suppose, at the very heart of everything we do, it is about cultural intelligence. And if you're not aware of cultural intelligence or haven't heard about it before, it's very much, it's defined as that capability, is a capability to work and relate effectively across diverse cultural contexts. So, and what I've always loved about cultural intelligence, and I know Marsha and I share this love, is that it's a very robust, academically research-based model, and there's been a lot of work that's gone into it. But in addition to that, what we're looking at is, a lot of research around it. But in addition to that, as I said, I think the intentionally inclusive leadership stuff is really helpful, and we draw on a lot of the work that Deloitte has done around that. And a particular favorite of mine is a sort of, I think what was one of Harvard Business Review's one of their most downloaded articles, the 6 signature traits of inclusive leadership. When we're looking at change management, we're particularly drawing on Kotter's model of change management, which I got introduced to a couple of years ago, which I think is incredible in terms of just that mapping that journey of keeping the momentum of change going. And then when we're talking about value-based leadership, I'm a John Maxwell coach and absolutely adore John Maxwell and the work he does on leadership. And so we're drawing on a lot of his work, a lot of Simon Sinek's work in terms of, well, what does vision look like, and how do leaders use vision as a tool to get people on the bus, as I always say. So so really you're looking at those 4 models working in a very particular way together, and that's very much what we use in various degrees. But I think part of that for me is about, yes, you need to learn the tools, and that's what the academic research offers us. But then the key challenge is, okay, but how do you apply those tools within the context of the public sector, and not just the public sector, but the NHS, where people are overawed, overpressured, and there's so many pressures at the moment. And how do you get them to make a difference? I just want to say, I think I was reading a piece of research some time ago, and it said that this was done some time ago, and it's looked at bias, and it looked at the 3 conditions under which bias was likely to thrive. And I think one of them was stress, not enough time, and multiple priorities. And I kind of thought, well, okay. That's helpful, because I don't know of any average leader in the NHS who is not dealing with stress, multiple priorities, and not enough time to do things well. So if that's a recipe for bias, then yeah, that's going to happen. And that's not because people are racist or sexist or anything. It's just because the conditions under which they're working do not give people enough time to actually think through some of these things. So how do you equip people with the tools to actually navigate those really difficult cultures in which they work in order to become inclusive? And that's what we're really passionate about.
And Judith, when you think about how, as a leader yourself, you've been able to navigate those pressures to then use these tools, what's the secret between, being able to do that? How have you been able to practice those? Oh, you're muted, Judith.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. I'm not going to say I'm totally accomplished yet, Marsha. I would not be here saying I am some expert, because I'm not. And I think that's the truth. You're on, it's a journey, and it's just being open to that. For us, just thinking about what Jennifer's been citing, she did a lovely piece with us on values, and really thinking about our own personal values within my team, and how they kind of come together to make us a team, what our team values look like, and how that contributed to our vision. And that was in itself just incredibly important, just to ground us as individuals about why are we in this job. As Jennifer said, it's incredibly stressful, and there's an awful lot of burnout in the NHS. It's really, really hard. There's always too much work to do. How do you remember your values and stay connected with what you're trying to deliver? It's connected with that experience, the people using our services, the patients and their carers, family supporters. And I think that's about touching base with our own personal values, our team values, and being able to drive that forward. And I think what I do quite frequently with my team is I reflect on those values with them. I think that's probably one of the things that Jennifer has shared with me, and bring them back to what are our values? What are we trying to actually do? What does it feel like to be somebody using services that we are overseeing at the moment, and the people that we are supervising and managing are delivering? And it's that kind of constant touching base with the real world, with what's going on with people who we're trying to be serving.
And Tim, I think we've got to be honest, just picking up on that burnout point, goodwill does seem very thin on the ground these days. People are utterly spent after, a couple of years of COVID. What is the great thing having this framework, these tools, which Jennifer's just described, that gives people that energy, would you say?
I didn't get the first bit of the question, unfortunately. What is the...
So given that, that point about burnout that Judith has been making, people are very exhausted, that goodwill is thin on the ground, if not, disappeared, off into the distance. And so getting people energized around trying to, do these things differently, lead differently, encourage others differently. It does take some effort on that part. How do you energize people around this? What do you think is energizing about it?
It's an interesting question. I think for all that's going on in the NHS at the moment, and I just came off a call with my senior HR people, today is a first that we never thought we would see happen, that we've got junior doctors and consultants striking on the same day. And the person in HR who's trying to support that was saying, I cannot tell you, how hard this is. This is a point I never thought we would see, and yet here we are. And yet, when I'm different in the sense that I sit within people and OD, so I manage programs, I don't manage people. So I have to work really hard to make sure that I stay connected and take myself out to the front line. And there's lots of different ways that I do that. And the thing that never ceases to amaze me with all that's going on is that people in our NHS want to do the best job they can. So actually, I think they're already highly motivated individuals. And I would say that across the board. I think what energizes them, even in these difficult times, is when they get a vision that we're introducing them to something that can actually be part of their solution to the problems they're facing. And I've worked in the NHS for many, many years, and it never ceases to amaze me at what amazing people we work with. That the ethos of healthcare people, the positive ethos, and it is that vocational bit, isn't it? So, because what I found is that, leading inclusively with cultural intelligence around, it sells itself, because actually once people have experienced it and work with it, the news spreads. And actually I have people knocking on my door and saying, when are the next opportunities to engage with this, and how are we going to take this to the next level? What are we doing?
Exactly.
But I digress slightly, because actually,
not at all. It's
about
very
energizing. I think we work with amazing cohorts of people across all professional groups. When I look at, we're a multi-site organization. Yes, very different cultures within our org, but actually phenomenal people. I feel so privileged to do what I do.
And I think the reflection that I had whilst you were speaking there was that, solutions combat fatigue. Change is energizing. And that's what the above difference appears to have been for your organizations, yes. Jennifer.
Yeah, and I think, got a couple of other questions in there. I think when people begin to see results, and I love the CQ model, because what it does is it there's that inner transformation that happens first. And often people will say to me, this didn't just change the way I work, but it changed the way I relate to my family or my friends, or suddenly I get culture, I get it, I understand it. And I think that energizes people as well. I think, someone's asked, Angela has asked as well, how should organizations sustain this behavior change as we're looking at years rather than a quick solution? Absolutely. And I just want to say that, because I don't think, we go in offering quick solutions. There are no quick solutions. As Marsha said earlier on, this is a long-term challenge. And actually, I don't think, I personally always like to say, I don't count myself as being culturally intelligent. I'm on a journey. And so we're never going to get there. And Judith, you're absolutely right. If we ever start saying we're there, then we've all got significant problems. But what we can say is that, we can signpost that. I hope our model signposts organizations to a different way of taking the journey. I hope it changes the narrative from a focus on what's wrong and all the things that we know are, and not ignoring those very, very real statistics that tell us that there's some serious things wrong in our system, but actually shifting our attention to, okay, what can we get right? What would right look like? What would good look like? And I haven't met one of those people who sits there going, well, I don't want that. Like Tim says, I meet managers and leaders all the time who are sitting there, and suddenly you're beginning to show them a different way of thinking about this. And people are sitting up going, wow, okay, I can see now how this can make a difference. This can make my job better. So you're right, Angela. It's not how you sustain the behavior change, is then the change management and change leadership bit. And that's something that I don't think we spend enough time teaching our leaders. Change is a science. Change leadership is a science. And there's a lot of evidence around how you do that well. And I think when we begin to introduce and shift, as Tim says earlier on, seeing EDI in this little cocoon to actually shifting it into organizational development, change, and leadership, then what the question we'll be asking is, how do we change our organizations and how do we sustain that change? And in order to answer that question, we'll have to start looking at equipping our leaders to be change leaders as opposed to be managers. One of the questions I often ask boards is, are you managing diversity or are you leading for inclusion? Because they're two different things. And if what a board is doing is spending time examining the data, and we spend loads of time, which, as a chief exec, I was there, have we moved 1% up, down, but, to the left or to the right, or 2%, or have we got enough of that? That's managing diversity. When we start having conversations about how we change the culture of our organizations to become more inclusive, that's leading for inclusion. And we all need to be making that shift in order to do that.
And it's something Dave Livermore says, actually, is that it's not rocket science, but it is science.
It's science.
It might not be rocket science, but it is science. And that point about there are no quick fixes, no silver bullets, no magic wands, just conscious, continuous, inclusive action. And Jennifer, as you reflect on the work that you've done over the last 5 years, I'm sure you have many moments, many programs where you are incredibly proud, but please do share something that you look back on, you say, that in the NHS I did that, and it's really made a difference.
I suppose, one thing I'm very conscious of is, like I said, when you ask me what makes the difference, is the leaders who make the difference. It's people like Judith, people like Tim, and I never take for granted the privilege of being let into their houses, if that makes sense, because actually what I'm asking them to do is to trust me. And I know that some of the people I work with haven't always had great examples or experiences of working around this agenda. So I think, when I look back on the leaders we've worked with, being allowed to work with them is always just a buzz I can never get over. I love the light bulb moments. I love sitting in a room with leaders and seeing people suddenly, you just literally see them. Naeem and I laugh about that across the room, and actually seeing that inner transformation and that safety, when people feel safe, suddenly people really begin to engage with you. And that, I think, is just absolutely phenomenal. The session that Judith was talking about when we talked about values, that was quite a personal session, wasn't it, Judith? And it required people being okay to trust and talk about what they were bringing into the workplace. And I think I always come away from that with such a sense of privilege, I have to say, just the privilege of people trusting me with that stuff and actually allowing me to take them on this journey. But as I what really thrills me now, especially, 2-3 years of having worked with people like NELFT and Tim, is seeing that change happen. And while I don't think that our model is the sole key to that change, but I do feel that it has played a part in getting people to a different place. And that makes me incredibly proud. And I'm really proud of the work that we're doing. We're continuing to work with a range of partners across the board, and hopefully the future will bring much more of that. So really pleased.
And we have a question in the chat, which perhaps we maybe haven't been clear enough about, is the difference between cultural intelligence and cultural competence. And Jennifer, if you don't mind just clarifying that for...
So anonymous attendee, absolutely great question. And one, I think if you're a cultural intelligence practitioner, you get asked all the time. Cultural competence, I think, is a much more kind of broader, in many ways softer, amorphous thing about how competent you are in engaging with different cultures. Whereas cultural intelligence is a defined academic model that really is measurable, which is the reason why all of the leaders that we work with will do the CQ assessment, which is developed by the Cultural Intelligence Center, and is the only academically accredited way of measuring your cultural intelligence. Cultural intelligence is based on a very clearly defined framework. It's academically validated, and it's the one way of also establishing, how your personal cultural intelligence, there are a whole range of things that is predictive. So it's predictive of a number of ways in which you might behave when in diverse cultural contexts. And that's where that model, that clearly defined model, it's research-based, allows for us to really look at some robust tools, which don't really exist in a more a sort of broader cultural competence or cultural awareness model. But cultural competence and awareness are very much integrated and part of the cultural intelligence model, but it's just a more clearly defined, structured framework that allows us to really equip people with a core set of tools and skills. I hope that answers that, Marsha.
I think it does, and certainly I'd just add that cultural intelligence, just going back to that definition that you shared earlier, the capability
Absolutely.
to work and relate effectively across cultural difference is a defined definition, and of course the research behind it asking the question, what's the difference between those that succeed in today's multicultural globalized world and those that fail? What's the difference between success and failure? There are 4 competencies, 4 capabilities that are outlined: drive, your motivation, how much do you actually want to work and relate effectively with others, the knowledge piece, what do you need to know, what do you need to understand, not just about different lived experiences, but those values pieces that we've been talking about, different leadership styles, of course, really crucial, how business systems work, so how the NHS might work with the Department for Health, for example, and those cultural differences there. So quite a lot to understand. And then crucially, a really important piece of the puzzle, that strategy piece. How do you plan? How do you check your assumptions? How you personally self-aware, organizationally aware? And that is a really, really important piece of the puzzle. The research shows that without that strategy piece, the cultural intelligence piece doesn't quite work. And then, of course, action. Ultimately, people judge us on our behaviors, our organizational behaviors, our personal behaviors. And so being able to be adaptable on the fly and being able to understand what we need to change in order to be effective at working, relating cross difference are those 4 capabilities that the cultural intelligence model is built on. And then, of course, Jennifer applies further models and theories in order to bring about that leadership transformation as well.
And I love the fact, if I can just say that question, the exam question that underpinned the CQ research, which is what is that difference between organizations that are effective in diverse cultural contexts and those that aren't? I think it's so relevant to the NHS today, because the NHS is current, operating in such a diverse world, and so many different global communities, and so I think that's what makes it such a powerful tool within this context.
Judith, Tim, may I get from you a few final words about some of the things that you would want anyone who's attended this webinar to go away with thinking about, something that they really should consider if they're going to take away working with above difference, and think about, okay, how do I convince those that need to be convinced that this is the way forward for us? Judith.
I think take an honest look at your own leadership style, at your own difference, at what you're bringing to the table. Take a look at your team. Take an honest look about how you're delivering, and have a think about how maybe cultural intelligence, from what you've learned today and what you might know generally, can enhance the offer. Are you as inclusive as you need to be? Are people able to access your services in the way that they should, or are there gaps in the way forward? And I think it's worth being brave, being bold, having those conversations, first of all with Jennifer, who will always make it feel easy to have conversations like that, who's always willing to engage, and will help you to think about how you would speak to senior leaders around that. But I think for me, it's about that honest, open questioning of myself, where I'm at, that led me really to kind of get back in touch with Jennifer, and to be open about what needed to change for me.
And Tim, what would you want people to leave with?
100% echo what Judith has just said, from starting with self, but I would also come into the level looking at your organization. What is your organization's vision? What is your organization's what are the values? And actually an honest mirror to have a look at how are we actually doing in relation to what we're saying we want to do? Where might the gaps be? Because actually and that's why, you know, and I think Jennifer was alluding to it, that actually, yes, this is really effective in its own right, the leading inclusively with cultural intelligence model. But actually, what I've needed to do is actually build the case for how this aligns to what the organization is seeking to do ultimately, for the people we serve, as in population health, but also for our workforce, as in, you know, the people that work for us and help us to, as an organization, to deliver those services to patients. So I think I would recommend having a real look at what are we saying as an organization, how are we doing, and actually for me it was then really clear that this is an absolutely crucial component for what we need to be embracing. And I feel quite privileged that, as a direct result for me personally on this journey, I've been asked to step into what is a very challenging, but I think a really important program manager role, to ensure that this, at that organizational level, is embedded to enable the leaders responsible for those clinical services, for those clinical teams and also non-clinical staff, to be able to be effective in delivering their part of the bigger picture, which is ultimately to provide outstanding care and experience to our patients.
And I think that's the really, really key thing, isn't it? Because when we look at the NHS, you know, a lot of the narrative around it is just how it's struggling, how it's creaking under the weight of what it needs to try to do for each other as staff, but also for the patients. And so to be able to have that helping hand, you've recognised a really good, useful solution that can come in and support and help with the delivery, to give people back the agency, actually, of their own hand, the ability for every individual, led by inclusive, culturally intelligent leaders in the way that Jennifer can help describe and support, is a really key difference in our NHS being able to function well. So, Jennifer, how can our colleagues listening today get in touch with Above Difference if they're interested in taking this further with you?
So the first thing I want to do is say, you know, big thank you to Judith and Tim anyway, and thank you to all of the leaders that we've had the pleasure of working with over the last 5 years. And as I said, it's about people letting us into their front room, and we are incredibly grateful that people have done that and have been able to take this forward and make it their own. I can see Bernadette on there, who is one of the people who's also led this in BART and a number of other organizations that we've worked with. So thank you very much to them. One of the things that we say is that everybody deserves to be well led, and everybody deserves a leader who understands them, who recognizes their cultural differences, who values them and creates space for them. And so I hope that for those of you who are listening today, you know, this is not just about saying you have to work with us, but I do hope that you'll start asking a different set of questions, because I'm a great fan of Einstein, who said the definition of insanity is we keep doing the same old thing and expect a different result. And I think when it comes to the EDI agenda, we have to start doing things differently if we are to begin to get different results for our communities, for our workforce. So I hope this has helped you to start thinking about that. But I know Naima has very ably posted stuff in the chat function. We do have, I often encourage people who are thinking about this to send a couple of senior leaders on our public masterclass. And the next one is in November, I believe. We are, I think it's November. I think Naima's just put a flyer in the post, because
27th, 28th.
Not to say dates because I always get them. And I believe that if you go on and try and register in the next couple of weeks, at least, you'll get a 10% discount if you do it from this particular webinar. But send a couple of your leaders on the masterclass, because I think that's a good way of dipping your toe in order to actually see whether this would work for you as an organization. And alternatively, we also have, I think Naima's also posted a taster session. If you do want to invite us in to work with a group of your leaders, we've got some taster sessions, and we sent out some information about that. So, but you know, tweet us, look for us on LinkedIn. Either way, thank you very much for saying that, Bernadette. But either way, yeah, do get in touch. And thank you, Judith, for those very kind words. We're quite happy to just have that first conversation with you and to begin to shape out how this might look. It is a journey, and nobody just gets up and gets on a journey immediately. We like to think with you about it. We like to think about how we integrate it with what you're already doing, how it adds value to what you're already doing. So thank you very much, Marsha.
We'd really like to thank you all for joining us, celebrating with us. It's transformative work, it's important work. We all value and care for the NHS like no other service in here. And so just being involved to be able to hold the hands of those who are involved, trying to deliver the best. That's what Above Difference has been doing, and in incredible transformative ways. So hats off, congratulations to Above Difference for this transformative work, clearly making a difference across trusts nationally. Being able to grow cultural intelligence, inclusive leadership, it matters. It matters to the NHS. So do feel free, get back in touch with Above Difference as you consider what your own journey is. There's been a survey, I believe, popped into the chat, and please, any opportunity to let Above Difference know what you think about the service, what you'd like to see as well. We want to be able to keep providing that useful, relevant content and programs for you. And of course, keep in touch so you can find out when the next webinar is, and we'll provide ever more insight, solutions and access to support. Thank you for joining.
Can I just say, Marsha, on next Monday, we've got another webinar looking at policing, but also emergency services, and that includes ambulance services as well. So if you've got colleagues who are from ambulance services who also want to know about how this might impact on them and look at some of the work we've done around, the group we call the Blue Light Services, then please sign up for the next webinar on Monday and join us then. And you'll be hearing from colleagues that we've worked with over the last 5 years in that sector as well, to hear how it's made a difference for them.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you very much. Thank you.